November 1942. Otzba, Algeria. Through the shimmering desert heat, a German reconnaissance patrol observed something that would alter their understanding of American military capability. Small American vehicles, previously dismissed as mere transportation, now approached their position, bristling with heavy machine guns and armor plating. These were not the unarmed quarter-ton trucks described in Wehrmacht intelligence briefings. Within hours, the first German after-action reports would document encounters with what soldiers were calling gun jeeps. The transformation had begun not in American engineering laboratories, but in the desperation of combat itself. When American forces landed in North Africa during Operation Torch on November 8, 1942, they brought thousands of Willys MB and Ford GPW Jeeps. These vehicles were engineering marvels designed through an intensive 1940 development program that saw American Bantam, Willys, and Ford competing to create the perfect light reconnaissance vehicle. The resulting Jeep could traverse terrain that stopped heavier vehicles, carry 5 soldiers or 800 pounds of cargo, and operate reliably in conditions from Arctic cold to desert heat. What it could not do was fight. General George Patton, observing initial American operations in North Africa, noted that the Jeep was extraordinarily useful for reconnaissance and communication, but remained vulnerable in combat. That assessment reflected conventional military wisdom. Light vehicles served logistical and reconnaissance roles. Combat was the domain of tanks, armored cars, and infantry. This doctrinal separation made perfect sense in peacetime planning. It proved inadequate when American forces encountered German and Italian troops who had spent 3 years perfecting desert warfare. The Afrika Korps destroyed American reconnaissance patrols with casual ease. Jeeps sent forward to scout enemy positions could not defend against even modest opposition. Crews either retreated without intelligence or died attempting their missions. The casualties mounted quickly during the first weeks of North African operations. Some reconnaissance units suffered heavy losses. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Unarmed vehicles could not survive in combat zones. Something had to change immediately. The solution emerged from practical innovation. Maintenance units began improvising modifications using whatever materials were available. A maintenance sergeant in the 1st Armored Division welded a Browning M2 50 caliber machine gun onto a reinforced pedestal mount. Another unit fabricated steel plates to protect radiators and drivers from small arms fire. A third mounted twin 30 caliber Brownings in tandem, sacrificing the 50 caliber's range for increased rate of fire. These initial modifications were crude, often cobbled together from salvaged equipment and scrap metal. They violated official specifications and horrified Ordnance Department officers who believed military equipment should conform to standardized designs. They also worked. Within weeks, American reconnaissance patrols were not only surviving, but actively engaging enemy forces. Jeeps that had been death traps became viable combat platforms. The psychological impact on American soldiers was immediate. They were no longer helpless when encountering enemy forces. They could fight back. German forces noticed the change with alarm. Early Wehrmacht intelligence reports described American reconnaissance as timid and predictable. By late December 1942, those reports noted aggressive American patrolling using heavily armed light vehicles that attacked rather than observed. The diversity of modifications reflected their decentralized development. Unlike German forces, where weapons development flowed from centralized planning through rigid approval processes, American modifications emerged organically from hundreds of units solving immediate tactical problems. The 2nd Armored Division favored configurations emphasizing firepower, mounting the largest weapons their jeeps could carry. The 3rd Infantry Division emphasized protection, adding armor plates that sacrificed some mobility for crew survivability. Airborne units created stripped-down variants that could be quickly disassembled and reassembled. Cavalry reconnaissance squadrons developed tactics emphasizing speed and maneuver, using armed jeeps in coordinated teams. None of these approaches was definitively superior. Each reflected specific tactical requirements and operational environments. By January 1943, the armed jeep phenomenon had spread throughout American forces in North Africa. German intelligence officers struggled to categorize what they encountered. Traditional vehicle classification systems had no category for the armed jeep. It was too light to be an armored car, too heavily armed to be a DG reconnaissance vehicle, too aggressive to fit existing doctrines. Captured German documents from this period revealed genuine confusion. One Abwehr technical intelligence report attempted to identify American Jeep variants based on weapons configuration, listing 17 distinct types. The report's author concluded with frustration that American modifications followed no standardized pattern, making systematic analysis impossible. The official U.S. Army response to unauthorized field modifications was predictably bureaucratic. Ordnance officers argued that non-standard vehicles complicated maintenance and supply. Safety inspectors worried about liability. Supply officers complained about tracking parts for non-standard configurations. All these concerns were legitimate from a peacetime logistics perspective. All were irrelevant when soldiers were dying because their equipment was inadequate. The debate ended decisively in February 1943 when senior combat commanders intervened. General Ernest Harmon, commanding the 1st Armored Division, personally countermanded orders to remove unauthorized modifications. General Terry Allen of the 1st Infantry Division ordered his maintenance units to accelerate modification programs. General Omar Bradley directed that modified Jeeps receive priority for spare parts, regardless of non-standard configurations. The Army's official capitulation came in March 1943 with Technical Bulletin TB 750316. This document essentially legalized the ongoing field modification program. Rather than mandating specific configurations, the bulletin established general parameters. Maximum additional weight was set to 500 pounds to avoid overstressing the chassis. Modifications could not interfere with basic vehicle operation. All weapons mounts must allow rapid removal. Within these guidelines, units were free to continue developing whatever configurations their situation demanded. More significantly, the bulletin triggered development of standardized modification kits that could be mass-produced and distributed. The M31 pedestal mount, designed to accept either 30 or 50 caliber machine guns, entered production in April 1943. By year's end, over 31,000 had been manufactured and shipped to combat theaters. The British had been modifying Jeeps since they received their first Lend-Lease allocations in 1941, though their approach differed from American practice. British Special Air Service operations in Egypt and Libya used Jeeps for deep penetration raids against enemy airfields and supply depots. SAS Jeeps mounted twin Vickers K machine guns scavenged from obsolete aircraft, weapons with phenomenal rates of fire approaching 1,200 rounds per minute. These heavily armed vehicles delivered overwhelming firepower in brief, violent engagements. A typical SAS raid saw Jeeps driving between rows of parked aircraft, gunners firing sustained bursts that destroyed dozens of planes before the vehicles vanished into the desert. By November 1942, SAS operations had destroyed over 400 Axis aircraft on the ground.
American units studied British techniques, but adapted them to different tactical requirements. British operations were surgical strikes by special forces after extensive planning. American armed Jeep operations were more opportunistic, aggressive patrolling that sought combat. This reflected broader differences between forces fighting since 1939 with limited resources and forces arriving with seemingly unlimited material. American armed Jeeps were not special forces equipment, but standard issue in regular line units. The vehicles were considered expendable, easily replaced from vast production runs. Where British operations emphasized economy of force and careful planning, American operations emphasized sustained aggressive action and a willingness to accept material losses. The invasion of Sicily in July 1943 introduced armed jeeps to terrain radically different from North African deserts. Sicily's narrow mountain roads, steep hillsides, and fortified towns created tactical challenges favoring defenders. German forces had created interlocking fields of fire that devastated conventional attacks. Armed jeeps proved surprisingly effective in this environment. Their small size allowed navigation of roads too narrow for tanks. Their speed allowed rapid movement between covered positions. Their firepower could suppress enemy defensive positions long enough for infantry to close. One engagement near San Fratello in August saw armed jeeps suppressed German machine gun positions that had pinned down infantry, enabling a successful assault within minutes. The Italian mainland campaign, beginning September 1943, brought new modifications addressing specific requirements. Mountain warfare in the Apennines required vehicles capable of operating on steep terrain with limited trafficability. The 4th Ranger Battalion developed a configuration mounting the .50 caliber machine gun on an elevated pedestal, allowing firing over stone walls. The 82nd Airborne Division refined their glider portable design, creating a jeep broken down into components fitting through a glider's cargo door and reassembled in under 10 minutes. The 1st Special Service Force equipped their jeeps with American and captured German weapons, recognizing that deep operations might require using available ammunition. German forces adapted tactics to counter armed jeeps, but with limited success. Anti-tank weapons were positioned to cover likely approach routes. Ambushes were prepared at choke points where jeeps would slow. Snipers targeted jeep crews. These countermeasures achieved some success, but could not solve the Germans' fundamental problem. They fought with limited resources against opponents with seemingly unlimited equipment. The United States manufactured over 640,000 jeeps during World War II. Germany produced approximately 50,000 Kubelwagen, their closest equivalent vehicle, and even these were inferior.
The Kubelwagen lacked four-wheel drive, possessed less than half the Jeep's engine power, and could not be easily modified to carry heavy weapons. German soldiers coveted captured American Jeeps, considering them among the most valuable war booty. Winter 1943 through spring 1944 saw the Italian campaign bogged down in brutal fighting for the Gustav Line, anchored on Monte Cassino. The mountainous terrain, winter weather, and prepared German defenses created a nightmare for attackers. Conventional vehicles struggled in snow and mud. Tanks became immobilized. Supply trucks could not reach forward positions. Armed jeeps continued operating when other vehicles failed. Their lightweight and four-wheel drive allowed movement on roads heavier vehicles could not navigate. They transported supplies forward, evacuated wounded, provided fire support, and maintained communication between isolated units. Commanders increasingly viewed jeeps not as specialized reconnaissance vehicles, but as general-purpose platforms capable of fulfilling virtually any battlefield requirement. Preparation for Operation Overlord, the Normandy invasion, brought renewed focus to jeep modifications. Allied planners recognized that bocage terrain would create unique tactical challenges. The Norman countryside consisted of small fields divided by thick hedgerows on earthen banks, creating natural defensive positions, channeling attackers into kill zones. Reconnaissance would be difficult through dense vegetation. Tank operations would be severely restricted. Infantry would fight fragmented battles. Armed jeeps offered potential solutions. Their small size allowed navigation of narrow lanes. Their speed enabled rapid movement and disengagement. A new modification emerged specifically for bocage fighting: the hedgerow cutter, a vertical steel blade mounted on the front bumper designed to snap enemy wires strung across roads. This simple device would save countless lives in France. D-Day, June 6, 1944, saw jeeps among the first vehicles ashore on Normandy beaches. Many were equipped with deep-water mooring kits, allowing them to be driven off landing craft into chest-deep water without flooding engines. These vehicles immediately began working under fire, towing anti-tank guns, evacuating wounded, carrying supplies, and engaging German positions. The chaos of the landings demonstrated the jeep's greatest strength: versatility. When specialized equipment failed, jeeps filled the gap. They served as ambulances when medical vehicles were destroyed. They carried ammunition when supply trucks were delayed. They provided fire support when armored vehicles bogged in beach sand. The Bocage battles of June and July 1944 proved everything planners had feared. Progress measured in hundreds of yards cost hundreds of casualties. Tank operations proved nearly impossible, as vehicles climbing hedgerow banks exposed vulnerable belly armor. Infantry advances across open fields were devastated by machine gun fire. Every hedgerow-boarded field became a separate battle. Armed jeeps demonstrated unexpected effectiveness in this nightmare terrain. Their tactics evolved rapidly through trial and error. The standard approach involved high-speed approaches to hedgerows, gunners firing over obstacles while drivers executed sharp turns to avoid German return fire. This combination of surprise, firepower, and rapid withdrawal often suppressed German positions long enough for infantry to advance. It was dangerous work, with high vehicle losses, but it worked. By late July 1944, virtually every American combat unit in France operated armed jeeps as standard equipment. The modifications no longer represented field improvisations, but systematic equipment allocation. New jeeps arrived from supply depots already equipped with machine gun mounts. Armor kits were distributed through normal supply channels. Ammunition for vehicle-mounted weapons received the same priority as infantry small arms. The transformation from experimental adaptation to standard doctrine was complete. German intelligence reports from this period reflect their frustration. One captured document from 7th Army headquarters noted that American armed light vehicles had created persistent security problems. Supply convoys, communication lines, headquarters locations, and artillery positions faced potential attack from small groups of American vehicles appearing without warning. The breakout from Normandy in early August, Operation Cobra, demonstrated the armed jeep's potential in mobile warfare. As German defenses collapsed and Allied forces raced across France, armed jeeps ranged ahead of main columns, scouting routes, seizing key terrain, and harassing retreating German forces. The Files Pocket Battle saw jeeps establishing mobile roadblocks along German escape routes. Operating in teams of 4 to 6 vehicles, they created chaos in German columns attempting to escape encirclement. A typical engagement saw jeeps attacking from multiple directions simultaneously before withdrawing. They rarely destroyed significant enemy forces, but created such confusion that German units disintegrated. The psychological impact far exceeded physical destruction. Operation Market Garden in September 1944, the ambitious Allied airborne operation in Holland saw armed jeeps in their most dramatic role. The 92nd and 101st Airborne Divisions landed jeeps by glider, establishing them in defensive positions within hours. These vehicles mounting 50 caliber machine guns became mobile strongpoints in desperate fighting against German counterattacks.
Their ability to rapidly relocate provided flexibility that static positions lacked. When German attacks threatened one sector, jeeps would concentrate fire at the critical point, then quickly reposition as the threat shifted. This mobility proved critical in defending landing zones against German forces enjoying numerical superiority and heavier weapons. The Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last major offensive beginning December 16, 1944, tested American forces like nothing before. German forces achieved complete surprise, driving deep into American lines through the Ardennes in winter conditions. Units were cut off, communication failed, commanders lost track of the battle. Armed jeeps became critical, serving multiple essential roles. They provided communication links between isolated units when radio failed. They conducted reconnaissance, determining German positions. They served as quick reaction forces dealing with enemy penetrations. They evacuated wounded when ambulances could not navigate snow-logged roads. At Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne Division was surrounded, armed jeeps provided the only reliable means of communication around the defensive perimeter. German forces, during the Bulge, had developed enormous respect for American jeeps. Captured vehicles were immediately allocated to division headquarters rather than kept by capturing units. In some documented cases, German officers fought over captured jeeps while American forces counterattacked nearby. This competition illustrated how thoroughly German forces relied on enemy material to supplement inadequate logistics. The irony was not lost on German soldiers who viewed American jeeps as superior to any comparable German vehicle. The final months of war, January through May 1945, saw American forces advancing into Germany. Armed jeeps led virtually every advance, operating far ahead of main forces to scout routes, identify German positions, seize bridges before demolition, and maintain contact between rapidly moving columns. Germany's Autobahn network provided excellent routes for jeep operations. Small teams could range 50 or more miles ahead, reporting German dispositions and seizing key terrain. The Germans, their forces collapsing under overwhelming pressure, could neither track these operations nor effectively counter them. The war in Europe ended May 8, 1945. The U.S. Army immediately analyzed equipment effectiveness to inform post-war development. The official Army Equipment Board conducted extensive interviews and reviewed after-action reports. Their conclusions regarding armed jeeps were unequivocal. The modification of quarter-ton trucks with machine gun armament and protective armor represented one of the war's most successful field adaptations. These vehicles provided combat capabilities far exceeding design parameters. Future light vehicle development should incorporate lessons learned from wartime modifications. This validation represented a fundamental shift in military thinking. The traditional view that specialized equipment must be purpose-designed in factories had given way to recognition that soldiers' combat experience generated solutions engineers might never conceive. Post-war analysis revealed the scope of the program. Tens of thousands of jeeps serving in European and Mediterranean theaters received combat modifications during the war. Over 30,000 were equipped with official M31 machine gun mounts. Thousands more received armor plates, wire cutters, or specialized equipment. The economic impact was impressive. By modifying existing vehicles rather than developing purpose-built combat cars, the Army avoided enormous procurement costs while achieving superior operational results. The armed jeep represented elegant engineering, achieving maximum capability from minimum resources through adaptation rather than expensive new development. German commanders reflecting on the war in post-surrender interviews consistently identified the American Jeep as among the most impressive Allied equipment. Its effectiveness stemmed not from technological sophistication, but from American willingness to modify equipment for actual combat requirements rather than theoretical specifications. This flexibility reflected a broader American approach, emphasizing practical results over doctrinal purity, material abundance over resource conservation, and rapid adaptation over rigid planning. The legacy of armed jeep modifications extended far beyond World War II. Korean War forces immediately armed their jeeps based on European theater experience. Vietnam saw armed jeeps in countless roles, from convoy security to forward air control. Post-war civilian jeep designs inherited features pioneered by wartime modifications. The modern military vehicle, from the Humvee to the MRAP, traces direct lineage to lessons learned through jeep modifications. Most significantly, the armed jeep experience established a principle that remains central to American military culture: that soldiers in combat have the best understanding of equipment requirements and that field innovation should be encouraged rather than suppressed. The story of how American soldiers transformed ordinary Jeeps into extraordinary combat vehicles deserves recognition as one of World War II's most important innovations. It was not brilliant scientists developing revolutionary technology in laboratories. It was practical soldiers solving immediate problems with available materials. Maintenance sergeants welding machine gun mounts in field workshops, engineers fabricating armor plates from salvaged steel, thousands of mechanics and soldiers who saw problems and fixed them without official approval. Their collective ingenuity created a vehicle that German forces never anticipated and never effectively countered. The armed Jeep became proof that American adaptability and tactical flexibility could overcome initial disadvantages through persistent innovation. German forces began the war with superior equipment, training, and tactical doctrine. American forces overcame these advantages not through matching German approaches, but by developing distinctively American solutions. The armed Jeep epitomized this approach, taking a vehicle designed for one purpose and adapting it to dozens of combat roles. This willingness to embrace field innovation over bureaucratic standardization, to trust soldiers' judgment over engineer specifications, became a defining characteristic of American military effectiveness. The armed Jeep stands as enduring testimony to the power of practical innovation and the wisdom of trusting soldiers to solve their own problems when given the freedom and resources to do so.